Welcome to the Breaking Into Finance podcast. My name is Craig Thompson, and this is the open source field guide to help you understand everything you need to know about breaking into finance. Let's dive in. Hey everybody, on today's episode, we are tackling a question that I've gotten a lot recently, and that is basically a bunch of versions of a question from people who are anywhere from 1 to 4 years into their career, and for one reason or another, they didn't land that investment banking job, that finance job straight out of school, but they're interested still in breaking into the industry. And I get asked a lot of questions about, what are some steps you can take to get there? What are some real tangible steps? And, if you can wriggle your way into a job or even an internship, then that's awesome. That's wonderful. But that transition isn't easy and it isn't straightforward. And there's no real guarantee that you can actually make it work. So on today's episode, I'm sharing a Q&A session that I recorded with Will, who is a recent graduate of Castleton University in Vermont. I actually originally met Will on a finance subreddit, and I'm grateful that he agreed to my invitation to a recorded Ask Me Anything session. And on today's episode, we're really going to dive a level deeper into some of the strategies that young professionals a few years out of school can use to build those credentials. And then we'll even do a little bit of ranking, these potential resume builders in terms of return on your time. So not just thinking about what is stuff that maybe is helpful or it is helpful, but just really trying to, you're busy and prioritize what are some tangible steps that you can take to break into this career path in a way that, optimizes not only your time spent on prep and stuff, but also money, especially to the extent that, potential graduate programs are involved. So that's what we're talking about on today's episode. Hope you enjoy it. Here's my conversation with Will.
So my name's Will. I went to Castleton University, and after I graduated, I knew that I wanted to do something in the finance industry. So I was able to get an internship at an investment planning firm, financial planning firm in Rutland. And I pretty much just I did daily performance reports, and then I did tax stuff. And then once I graduated, did landscaping over the summer, and I was applying to jobs, and I was trying to figure out what to do exactly. I know I want to do something in finance, but I waited too long to really look into my career. And that's something I wish I could do differently. But somehow I got a job as National Life Group.
I'm familiar with them, yeah.
So somehow I got a job. I got a screening interview for a private equity analyst position. It was one of my first interviews after college, and I was extremely unprepared. And now that I've done a ton of research, I don't even know how I got in the first place. But pretty much to start, just a quick question: what made you decide to do this? Because obviously I've been looking at the investment banking industry, and every single person out there knows how to get in there, but they want you to pay $500 a month or something. So I was just curious. I've looked at podcasts and I haven't really found anything this informational that has the raw information that you need.
Yeah, that is a big part of it. I think honestly, for me, I was, in your shoes in a lot of ways. I also went to school in Vermont. I went to Middlebury, not Castleton, but my wife grew up in Bristol.
Okay.
But nobody in a little bit different school situation, but nobody in my family worked in business before, let alone finance. And so, it was even worse in 2011, 2012, when I was trying to learn about this stuff, the tutors didn't exist.
Yeah.
But even if they did, it's how do you know if they're a grifter? Is it even going to work? And even if it did, I didn't have the money to pay them.
No, I get it.
So it was basically, it's great that that's growing because that provides another mode of access for some people. But for me, this really is just a passion project I feel like there are a lot of smart, hardworking, motivated people out there who just don't have the unlock to this stuff.
Yeah.
So what if I just put it out there?
Well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I'm sure I speak for many, but I appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah. And it's been growing a lot. I've actually like amazingly like 45% of my audience is non-US, is like
Oh,
international,
hmm.
which I totally didn't expect.
I've been looking, so I've been doing a bunch of research, obviously, trying to figure out the best way to get into investment banking as someone who graduated from a small non-target liberal arts college. And right now, I am studying for the CFA, just not for the designation, but just to learn the material. And I feel like I didn't take advantage the way I should have in college. So I'm just doing this just to familiarize myself. But for you, looking at like the technical skills, I know a bunch of people talk about Excel. Obviously, it's a huge process in investment banking and doing macros. But do you have any suggestions on ways to improve technical skills, whether it be like learn Python or macros?
Before I answer that, I kind of want to ask a preemptive
Yeah.
question, which is a little bit like what is the, quote unquote real reason of why investment banking? And what I mean by that is how much of it is you've heard that it is like a good job to go into, how much of it is like I like finance, I like numbers, and I hear that this is like a great way to make money doing that. How much of it is like, I don't know if there's some long-term plan that you have that includes investment banking, just out of curiosity.
So kind of, I didn't really know what investment banking was. And then when I did some research, I always knew that I wanted to do something with numbers. Like even when I was a kid in school, numbers were came easily to me. Reading, writing wasn't my strong suit, but numbers were. I could always get by and make the numbers work. And then as I was doing research, I was looking to investment jobs and I was looking into private equity and hedge fund as so once I got that interview, I knew that I looked more into private equity and I was like, this is something that I really want to do. And then I figured out that a bunch of requirements are investment banking, obviously, doing mergers and acquisitions. And I just love numbers. And honestly, I love being in Excel too. It's just something, it's such a neat thing for me to do. And I've recently been able to do all of it without a mouse. So I just feel like, and the grind is something that also attracts me. I've just always been someone who's been busy and like I've always done sports my whole life. I played in college and just something about that inside me attracts me to it, working those hours. I know it's not for everyone, but that's the reason I want to do investment banking.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think those are all great reasons. So with that, I'll get back to your question, which is, kind of best technical skills to learn, which
Yeah.
is a little bit different from best ways to learn the technical skills. But what I would really say is, you mentioned wanting to study for the CFA. I
Yep.
think that is a great thing to do
Okay.
because one, it's definitely valuable information to learn. And certainly if you can getting like level 3 certification is difficult. It takes a ton of time to study for, but every step along the ladder, the CFA is really nice in that one, it's a credential that people really value. And so even if it doesn't immediately like those like learnings don't immediately translate to a job, you're still building something that
Yep.
people will value down the road. And two, yeah, it's like directly helpful and relevant stuff to learn. So I think it's also and like there are a lot of like it's a little bit more structured of a thing to study
Yep.
for versus like I want to study for investment banking and there's a whole host of things that could mean. So I think that's a really smart strategy. Um, you asked about kind of computer sciencey software,
Yep.
like trying to learn about like Python. I honestly wouldn't prioritize that
Okay.
too much unless it is an interest of yours.
No.
Certainly, like coding and computer science skills can be tangentially helpful, but I feel like it's closer to cross training. Like it's
Yeah.
sort of like, being a baseball player and running indoor track as a winter sport. Like it's sort of like, yeah, like it helps and like you're in shape, but it isn't nearly as directly relevant as something like the CFA.
Yeah, that's something I saw that you took got your something from, I forget where it was, Penn, I think. The
MBA, yeah.
MCI or that what was it, the MCIT?
Oh yes, yeah, that was
Okay.
yeah, dual degree engineering school.
Yeah.
Yeah, so great
Cool.
question. That was definitely not aimed towards
Okay.
learning investment banking or private equity centric skills. And that was just, something I wanted to learn as an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
more so than as an investment banker. But good question.
Yeah. So not Python, but Excel skills. I know those are extremely relevant as
Excel skills are, you're totally right, extraordinarily relevant, but for entry level, even private equity, but entry level kind of investment banking, private equity, any of those jobs, you actually won't be tested on those Excel skills in the interview.
okay,
All
makes sense.
of those interviews are focused on kind of the subject matter content. So it is things like if you're passing, like CFA, like level 2, level 3, it's closer to those type of concepts that you'll be asked to talk to verbally rather than given like a modeling challenge.
Yeah.
It really is at that second level, like if you're applying to be a private equity associate, where you might be more likely to get kind of like an Excel modeling challenge. But anybody who's giving you an Excel, case study or take home likely expects that you learned that in whatever your current job is. And so if you're looking for more of that analyst level, that entry level stuff,
Yeah.
if you want to use Excel to try to hone and build your, broad conceptual skills, like that is an important thing to do. But all the like learning about the macros and like all of that stuff, I wouldn't prioritize that too heavily. It more like is something you might learn on the fly, but I definitely like wouldn't pay someone for like a course to
Yeah.
take that kind of stuff.
No, I wasn't do plan on doing that. Yeah, I've listened to a couple of your mock interviews, and I think most of it is obviously about the financial statements. I started listening to a couple episodes before this, like when you're walking through with those two students from Middlebury, just the three financial statements and familiarizing yourself with those. Do you have suggestions on what's the best way? Because obviously there's learning it and memorizing it, and then there's understanding it and applying it.
My hope is the way I tried to craft the podcast is a series of narratives and discussions that give you practice in hearing kind of how I'm using different terms. I realize that without the visual, sometimes that's tough, and sometimes a little bit of that gets lost. And so the main, like one good way of practicing with the three statements is if you can go look up a public company and you can just go look at their filings, like look at their income statement, look at their balance sheet, look at their statement of cash flows, and then, copy all of that data into a different tab and try to rebuild those numbers yourself.
Okay.
Like copy a version over and delete all the numbers and leave all the line items and see if you can make the math work of, like, can you calculate operating profit from, revenue and cost of sales and, an SG&A cost? Then can you build the components of your cash flow statement using balance sheet numbers and using income statement numbers? And that I would recommend doing in Excel, but that's less like hardcore Excel skills. And it's
Yeah.
more
No.
just like, using it to try to reverse engineer something that you're seeing. And then when you're stuck, honestly, I think ChatGPT is a better resource than, Investopedia or Wall Street Oasis or any of these other like forums, because it's generally pretty accurate at like being able
Yeah.
to help you with formulas. And generally the information they have, I think, is actually pretty good.
And then for the technical interviews, is it something, obviously, a big part of it, I assume, is taking something from the income statement and flowing into the cash flow or the balance sheet, or vice versa with one of those?
A very popular example of an interview question, and this is like the most popular to ask of these types of things, is it's like, let's say you take a company and depreciation increases by 10. Walk me through how that impacts the three financial statements.
Okay.
And the main thing that I would encourage you or anyone listening to prep to do, if you're trying to prepare for that interview, is the balance sheet is a really great way of figuring out if you're doing the math correctly.
Yeah.
Because on the balance sheet, the balance sheet will balance. So your total assets will always equal your total equity plus liability. And if you're doing something or you're inputting something somewhere and it's not balancing, then that means you have a math error somewhere, you're leaving something out. So that, I think, is one good way to practice. And the other thing to always keep in mind with this stuff is one thing they're testing is to make sure you know about tax affecting whatever these impacts are. So the tax shield on, whatever cost changes that are flowing through the income statement. So that's just one thing to keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, definitely good. And then, so that's like the main thing for like the interview process. Or so going on the interview process, one of my questions was, let me just find it. So standing out in an interview, I know there's been things about having the interviewer talk about themselves. And would you just give your 2 cents on that?
Yeah. I've said this before and I'll say it again. One great goal that I think is pretty all encompassing anytime you're going into a professional interaction is, ask yourself, are you building like and trust with, whoever you're speaking with? And likability is, like, do they like you? Are they on your side? Are they going to fight for you or say like, hey, like, what about Will? And that's where getting them to talk about themselves, I think, is kind of a nice way of getting them to like you and, and want to support you. The trust side is really on demonstrating as much mastery of the technicals as you possibly can. And critically, if they ask you a question that you don't know, or if they're referencing a term that you don't understand, don't try to BS them.
Okay.
I don't care what you studied and where you studied it. Every single second year analyst knows like 10,000 times as much as you do, and they're BS proof. You just can't do it. So don't try. And I actually, especially coming from a liberal arts college, you can often spin those occasions into a positive. If you say, sorry, like, I'm not familiar with that term, could you just define it for me quickly? And if they, in their definition, use another term that you don't understand, you're welcome to keep asking about these things. Because if you can demonstrate that live, under pressure, in an interview setting, you can learn something and then apply what you learned right away, I, as an interviewer, at least, like, that to me is a stronger response than if you just directly quoted me the correct answer. Because when you do that, I know that you knew the answer to the question, but I don't really know if you just memorized that format of answer or if you really have learned it. And so if it's something that you're learning live on the fly in the interview, that tells me there's no way you memorized it because you didn't even know the term. So those types of answers often stand out to me and, help me project your growth, if you were to work, for me full time, in a way that I find really impressive.
So it's kind of just, how do you handle under the pressure, and do you shut down or do you do your best to figure out the answer?
Another thing that I really wanted to emphasize in producing these mock interviews is there is no person out there who gets asked the question, doesn't need to take a second to think about it, and they just spit out the right answer. Like, that person does not exist. You've heard, people from some really amazing programs like best schools in the world participating in these mock interviews. And even they take a second to think about it. Not every term they have down. So that's kind of the other part of this is you really have to know your stuff. And I don't want this to come across like, if you sort of know it, like maybe you can be okay because nobody knows everything. That's not the case. Like, you really want to know your stuff. I just hope that you also have the confidence to know that your 97% or your 95% actually stacks up pretty well relative to even the top, other candidates out there.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then some more getting the interview. So I've seen a bunch of things I've seen a bunch of forums talking about you need an MBA from a top 7 school in the US. And then I've also heard about the Master of Finance, and I listened to your first, like the episode you told me to, and the guy got a Master's of Finance, was accepted, and had the internship lined up. So if you could just like give your thoughts, because I've seen a bunch of controversy saying that Masters of Finance is like maybe for someone who graduated like within 2 years, didn't realize they wanted to do investment banking until they graduated, and now they're looking to redo it and like have a second chance.
It's a great question. And yeah, so this is episode 4 with Austin, who's my co-founder in this business, like absolutely brilliant guy. Went to a non-target school, went to University of Oklahoma, and worked in IT, like not even in finance, for his first job. And he did it like he was just amazing at this stuff. And yeah, he applied to the Master in Finance program and ended up getting his job without even attending. So he didn't even go, he didn't pay tuition. He just got accepted and then was marketing himself off of the acceptance, and then ended up saying, well, I don't actually need the school because I got what I came for. So I do think that Master in Finance program is a good early career switching tool, which is to say, yes, like if you were 0 to 2 years out of school and you feel like for whatever reason, whether it's the job you're in right now, the pedigree or perceived pedigree of where you went to school, maybe if there isn't really the alumni network there, doing that Master in Finance program can, if it's the right school with the right alumni base, can help, take you to that next step. I will say master's programs generally, including the MBA, are big moneymakers for the universities that, support those programs. So it is definitely important to be careful about which program. It's not just any Master in Finance program, it's the right one. And the best way to figure out if it is, air quotes, the right one is to look at where alumni of that program have wound up. So I'm sure that if you reach out to the admissions office and you say, hey, like, can you provide me like sample firms of where your alumni go? I'm sure they have versions of that. And then just do your own work on LinkedIn to double check. Like if there's a firm you're looking at, like go on LinkedIn and search that firm and, that master's program. You definitely want to do your own diligence on some of those because it costs money. It takes time. It isn't costless for you. So that is if you're 0 to 2 years out and you feel like you don't quite have the platform yet. The other way that in a lot of ways is more standard is the MBA. And for the MBA, if you are interested in getting some sort of investment banking job, I actually wouldn't say it's just a top 7 MBA. Like the list is probably wider, especially if you're open to kind of regional investment banks too. It's probably more like top 15. So it's not just any school. I know you're from Vermont, and not to throw like UVM's business school under the bus, but that program might not be the right one for finance because it definitely has like, there are a lot of other things that MBAs do besides investment banking coming from that program. But like a Cornell Johnson, I don't know where they are in the rankings, but it's somewhere in that like maybe not quite top 5, but in that like 5 to 15, 5 to 20. And there were plenty of Goldman associates that went to Cornell for MBA. So there's a lot of those types of programs I think are worth looking at. The main thing to keep in mind there is getting into those programs can be kind of hard. And so for me, my sense is that the Masters in Finance programs are easier to get into than the MBA programs of that caliber. But the MBA programs do give you a little bit better platform coming out, and it is a little bit more of a well-worn path. The other really important thing to note is coming out of an MBA, you're looking at investment banking associate jobs. Coming out of a Master's in Finance, you're probably looking at investment banking analyst jobs. So you might literally be doubling your entry salary by coming in as an associate versus coming in as an analyst.
Okay, and that's one thing too that I saw, but then people always talk about, they're obviously hiring more analysts and then they're not hiring as many associates with the MBA, but they're also the associates that they're looking for that have an MBA. You have a smaller pool, so it's kind of one thing or another of that.
Yeah, I think you're right about kind of like the conditional probabilities. I wouldn't worry too much about that. If you're coming out of the right school and you have the right motivation, it might not be at the one firm that's like your dream firm, but if you have a list of like 10 firms, you'll find one.
No, that's something that I've seen some research, and like obviously going to a regional bank compared to like a middle market or a bulge bracket is definitely easier. So I thought about one example, doing like a pre-school internship at a regional bank, getting your internship, and then between your first and second year, maybe doing an internship at a bulge bracket or elite. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
then
And by the way, the CFA can be part of your pre-MBA work as well. The CFA is a credential that MBA admissions officers will see and will value. So the CFA is kind of, especially if you feel like you're building from a base that isn't where you want it to be. I do think that is a nice way of starting to think about stacking stuff. So passing your CFAs, it's really hard to get through all three the first time. Don't get discouraged by that. And then, getting a good GMAT score. And if you're doing those two things, then whatever work experience you have now is like good and nice. But if you're performing well in those, that will really help you in kind of advancing to getting whatever that other credential is that you're really looking for.
Yeah, and I'm also like extracurricular activities. I know that's a big thing. I know it's big in undergrad. I assume that it's still a factor in masters, but not as big.
I don't think it's quite as important.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Because it's less of a student community building thing, and it's a lot more pre-professional. So I think they care. Put it this way. If you had the choice of like doing two things in your spare time and you chose, I study for the GMAT and I study for the CFA, or like I do volunteer work on Saturdays and I, play in a rec softball team, I think the master's programs, all else equal, they want you to be well-rounded, but they probably don't mind if you're a little bit less well-rounded in that case, and a lot more pre-professional. This is what I'm studying for. I want to go to your program because I know exactly what I want to do. Yeah. And they can be like, okay, like this is Will and this is what he wants to do. And I feel like I have a really good understanding of that.
Right. Because before I even I committed to doing a lacrosse coach at a local high school, and then I'm also going to be doing the CFA too. So I was just wondering
if you can do both, that's great. Yeah. That's really only if you only have time for one. I think showing that you're community minded and community oriented obviously helps as well. It was really, just that it might not help as much if you kind of need whatever that other thing is.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you giving all the advice to me.
So that's today's episode. Thank you so much for joining. And by the way, if you're listening to this, if you have questions, if there are things that are top of mind for you in your search that you think aren't just specific to you, but might apply to, a few other people, my bet is that it applies to thousands of other people. So please shoot me a note, craig@breakingintofinancepodcast.com. Send me your questions. And if these are things that we haven't answered on previous episodes, or perhaps underexplored on previous episodes, I want to hop on a Zoom call with you. I want to record a Q&A. I want to give you answers that are going to help you right away in a high impact way. And hopefully there's also some insights that the rest of the community can gain to share as well. So quick plug to do that. And then while you're at it, if you're enjoying these episodes, it really does mean a lot if you could just hit that subscribe button. And then, really importantly, just share with your friends, share with your network, just let people know about the existence of this resource. It's something that is meant to be for y'all, and I hope you find it helpful. That does it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. And remember to check out our website, breakingintofinancepodcast.com, where you can submit questions, join our Substack to stay up to date on new content releases, and much, much more. We'll see you next time.